So again, thank you everyone for joining us. For those of you who are joining us today who may be new to Outward Bound or unfamiliar with who we are and what we do, thank you again for tuning in to learn more about who we are and what we do. Outward Bound in the USA is a widely recognized leader in the social emotional learning development of learners of all ages. Over the decades of we have proven best practice and impact that make us a partner of choice for schools, colleges, employers, and other youth-serving organizations nationwide. Through our 10 regional Outward Bound schools, we deliver outdoor programs that inspire students to believe in their potential and discover boundaries or boundless limits to what they can accomplish for themselves, their communities, and around the world. Throughout this call, what we ask that you keep yourself muted, but encourage you to share your comments and appreciations in the chat throughout the discussion. And we'll leave a few minutes toward the end to answer a few of those questions. My name is Caitlin Cowan. I am our National Content and Communications Manager here at OBUSA, and I'll be moderating our discussion. We also have our Director of Brand and Marketing, Ben Warden, who will be helping to moderate the chat, so you can keep those comments and discussion points coming. And feel free, as you kind of tune in here, to introduce yourselves. Let us know who's on the call, where you're coming from, who you are. We'd love to know who's here with us today. And so to kick it off, we are thrilled to be joined by a panel of 4 experts in the field of education and SEL. Katie Dalbey, the Director of Learning and Evaluation for Outward Bound USA. Gil Noam, the Chair of Partnerships in Education and Resilience, or PEAR. Gianeen Anyika, the Principal of James G. Blaine Academics Plus, a school in Philadelphia, also an educational partner of our Philadelphia Outward Bound School. And lastly, Annie Jonas, Chair of Education at Warren Wilson College in Asheville, North Carolina. To kick off this discussion, how about we have each of you introduce yourselves and tell us, why are you invested in SEL?
I can start. As Caitlin said, I'm Katie Dalbey. I use she, her pronouns, and I've been working for Outward Bound USA for about 6.5 years now. And prior to that, within the Outward Bound system since way back in 2002. So clearly I have a passion for this work. I think it really comes from my own experiences as a young person. I didn't have the opportunity of doing an Outward Bound program, but I did some similar youth development type programs, and seeing the impact that that had on me in terms of the skills that I developed and the ways that it's helped me to navigate both the challenges and opportunities that I've encountered in my life has led me to feel really passionate about getting those opportunities to others. And I'll pass it over to Gil.
Hi, I'm Gil Noam. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. I'm a great fan of Outward Bound USA, Outward Bound schools. And I actually went to a school in Germany that was a sister school to Salem, which was the school that Kurt Hahn, the founder of Outward Bound, created. So I feel like I had a lot of my youth spent around Outward Bound ideas. And I think that's really not very far from the love for SEL, because I think that Outward Bound builds character. It has a lot to do with a holistic view of the person, a humanistic view of a whole person that is really exploring the world and exploring also the natural world. So I believe very strongly from early on, and in a very subjective way, that this is the way we have to go, and we have to make this possible for lots and lots of students, all students and all the educators and family members that support the students' growth. Why don't you say who's next?
Thank you. My name is Gianeen Anyika, and I am the principal of James G. Blaine Academics Plus. Been there for 16 years in the North Philadelphia, named Strawberry Mansion section of the city. Definitely an urban community with the love of just learning. And so Blaine is significant in using SEL, and since I've been there, that's the foundation of our work. It's because our children definitely need the social emotional learning in order to make the best pro-social choices in their learning. So we partner with various folks, and Outward Bound being one of our favorites, and I'm glad to be here in supporting of the work.
Okay, thanks, Gianeen. I'm Annie Jonas, chair of the education department at Warren Wilson College. I got my start in education as an Outward Bound instructor. So I think I started off my career understanding the need and the significance of social emotional learning with maybe without those terms, and have since really specialized in youth development and training future teachers, and just see tremendous value in social emotional learning, both for the individual student in terms of their own growth and ability to be successful in a career in supporting their community. But I also see it as a foundation for a justice and equity framework for education, that they're the core building blocks for that. And then finally, just that it fosters a community of inquiry and deeper learning. To have the students practicing SEL skills allows for that deeper meaning and purpose in their learning. So I'm super excited to be here today. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. I guess just to dive right into the first questions and really get into this conversation, we know that social emotional learning has been and continues to be a critical component of development and a holistic growth for young people. Gil, I'm curious, from your perspective and your experience, can you tell us a little bit about how the field of social emotional learning has evolved, and has the data that we're collecting in that process changed with it too?
It's a really great question. Yeah, I mean, it would be sad if the field wouldn't have developed, but it's so interesting that it took such a long time for education to absorb the ideas of SEL that we are kind of very fast moving to yet another level of investigation and thinking. And what I mean with that is, can really divide up, I think, education into three phases. One is the kind of academic cognitive development that really permeated a lot of the 1990s, 2000, the no child left behind idea, which is the young person as a kind of learning machine, and the teacher as a person keeping the young person focused on academic cognitive learning. That didn't go as far as we had hoped. And I think the next phase has been one that goes back to John Dewey, which is the whole child. And I think we're kind of in the middle of that, and SEL is part of that kind of evolution, that way of thinking, which is there isn't just a cognitive child, it's a holistic child. I mean, the holistic side means that the learner has emotions, the educator has emotions, experiences matter, and we construct reality, and we have to give the young person the tools to construct their reality. Now, I think that that's part of the SEL moment, and it's really amazing how fast education has absorbed that, because even in the Obama years, we were still, like in the first 2 years of his presidency, we were still focusing really on testing and making sure that kids have the right amount of knowledge. That has now changed, and I think SEL was a very strong part of that. Now, I think that we're really in a kind of third phase right now, And that third phase, and then I'll stop and give others kind of room to think about this various issues here. The third phase, I think, is a kind of wellness school idea, where the focus is actually not only on SEL, but on the wellness of students and teachers. And I think that comes very strongly out of the COVID years, where so much was around fear and around really mental health problems that surged. And I think right now we're in this moment where the focus is not as much on SEL. SEL kind of gets incorporated, but I think the new phase is really about resiliency. And not that these constructs are new, but I think the issue is the recognition that there's a lot of adversity and that we have to build strength and mental health strength. And SEL, as you know, is a kind of tier one approach that everyone needs certain things, and you don't need adversity in order to make sense of it. But resilience is really about the fact that we live in a world of crisis, and we do not just need SEL skills, we actually need resiliency skills. We need an ability to address the adversity and develop strengths out of the adversity. So I believe we're kind of in this moment where SEL just kind of flourishes, and not that it kind of is going away, but that something else is actually coming forward. And I think that is supported also by the fact that half of the country is not allowed to use SEL as a term anymore because it's become politicized, and it's become Republican states do not allow SEL to be used as a term. So we're also in need of a new term because of that. Let me stop there. I think about the research, I can continue, but there's going to be other moments to talk about this because I don't want to take all the time.
Yeah, Gianeen and Annie, what are some aspects of what you're working on with your schools and education, this idea of, holistic growth and the evolution of education and wellness for a student? What are things that you're excited by in your field of work right now?
Yes, I can speak on the various partnerships that Blaine is utilizing, and one being with the school district, being able to identify relationships first. With that work, Blaine is, I think, one of the schools that is a model of how we're implementing tier 1 through 2 and 3 effectively. Blaine used to be, when I first got there, we implemented like a more PBIS model where it's like token with the rewards and things like that. And I saw like there was a definite decrease in behaviors and wanting to learn. And so when I learned about restorative practices and the relationships first, our school completely turned around. And so we did a complete mind shift on teachers, the entire staff, not just teachers, the entire staff and students and parents, and basically allowed children to be able to have a voice, to be heard and seen, and be able to be understood. And so our children are now doing amazing work with this, becoming leaders. Our test scores are going up, attendance is going up. It's just amazing to see with just implementing a program with Fidelity, where it's focused on relationships. And as the good doctor just said, the resilience. We are definitely teaching the work of resilience through this work as well. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Marc Bergeron, and I'm from Canada. And I'm a retired physician. And when I was 21, as a student, medical student, I attended the Hurricane Island class, age 36 in 1971. And I spent 28 days on the sea, on the ground, and was a terrific experience for me. Very stressful, but very rewarding as a person, or as a contact with other people, and I guess it helped me during my medical course to reinforce myself and take confidence in myself, and I never forgot the people I met there. I saw some of them after, but actually I'm not active in the movement, but I'm still thinking of Outward Bound, and I will never forget that experience, and I wish everybody could. I wish every young people should have the chance to experiment that.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Mark. We're glad that you're here and tuning in to learn more from our experts and our panelists and what we're working on today. Annie, if you want to go ahead and just chat a little bit about some of those things, going off of what Gil and Gianeen have shared and other things that you're excited about in the work that you're doing.
Great, thank you. I'll focus on college-age student and emerging adults with whom I interact often, and most often right now. I see an emerging understanding about student success being more than test scores and matriculation, and trying to encompass something greater, perhaps what Gil was suggesting, that this idea of thriving and flourishing, that the definition of student success needs to encompass that opportunity for students to explore what may be called SEL, but more broadly, what supports well-being. And with recent studies suggesting that a majority of young people lack a sense of purpose, I think higher ed has a role to play in supporting young people, emerging adults, to develop a sense of purpose, and that actually isn't in contention with career preparation, that it can be a foundation for success in a career, but success in your community. And I think higher ed is wrestling with this too, but also acknowledging that students are appearing with higher rates of depression and anxiety and a lack of purpose. And that if we're looking at holistic success, that has to be part of the definition, and also has to be part of our role, not just in the corners, but central to the role of not just counselors, but also faculty, folks who are working directly with students on a daily basis.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Katie. I saw that you took yourself off mute.
No,
Love
just
to
getting
just
ready.
hear a little bit more from you too about some of the work that the Learning Lab is doing, a little bit about the lab and just some of the data that you're collecting and some of the findings that you're seeing.
Yeah, I think I'd start by sharing, kind of connected to what everyone has said so far. We've been on a journey really since 2017 as a national network to better understand what the social emotional development that's happening for our students is. How do we define that? How do we measure it? And then also, what are our staff doing that is helping to contribute to that? What are the key interactions they're having with students? What are the key experiences they're facilitating for students that are helping to get to that growth? We are generally thought of as like a catalyst program. So we're a short-term intervention, different than the college environment where a student may be there for hopefully 4 years. In high school or K-12, they're repeatedly interacting with the same people, the same relationships, like Gianeen was talking about. At Outward Bound, we're kind of a moment in time, and we do see significant skill development in these areas of social emotional skills, those skills that build resiliency, that help students be ready to tackle those challenges and adversity in a short period of time. So it's been really exciting to say, what is happening here? What is it that's actually happening in these experiences? And are there things that can inform the greater field as well from that? So we worked really closely with Gil and his team to go out and do hundreds of hours of observation of our programs and really started to kind of collate what are the interactions that we're seeing? What are students saying they're learning? What are the changes we're seeing in students? We developed a tool that we call the domains of thriving that essentially outlines what are the key areas of growth that our students experience and what are the key practices that our staff are using to influence that growth. And what's really interesting about those practices is they work really well in concert together on an outward bound experience, but individually they're practices that an educator could use in any setting. And I think it really speaks to what Gil was talking about in terms of you can't really separate the academic from the social and emotional. The Aspen Institute put together a national commission on social, emotional, and academic learning a few years ago. And the main thing that came out of their report was these things are intertwined. You can't learn math without being able to persevere through a hard math problem, right? Like they're just always happening at the same time. So some of the practices we've identified, for example, for perseverance is embracing mistakes, setting up a culture and an approach that says it's okay to fail. Let's even celebrate that failure sometimes, right? And that helps then students to build that skill of sticking with something when it's hard, when they're not feeling successful. That's a practice that could be used in any classroom, in any youth development setting. So that's been really exciting. And then we measure those skills that we've identified through a student outcome survey at the end, and we're able to see that change and the growth that students report from beginning to end, even on very brief experiences.
Annie, I saw you nodding a few times over there. I'm not sure if you wanted to go ahead and jump in and share.
Well, I'm just excited about it. I completely agree that you can't parse the two apart. And I think it's related to the point that somehow that if we waste time on social emotional learning, that the real learning won't happen. And I think there's strong argument that deeper learning can happen if you can simultaneously work on, an academic task, if that's what you want to call it, or some other authentic task in addition to social emotional skills.
Yeah, I think just based off of, research and studies and all of the anecdotal things that you've shared so far, SEL is working. And so I think it's really a question of like, what about it is working? And so Gil, I'm curious from your perspective too, like what about SEL is working and all of the research that you've helped to lead and guide. What are your thoughts on those outcomes that we're seeing?
Yeah, I want to actually give Dawn McDaniel, Dr. Dawn McDaniel, a shout out because she was the key person from our program and Harvard-based initiative to actually work with Katie and team and really observe a lot of things that happen kind of in the field. I would like to just share. Is that okay if I do? I have the right to share. Let's see. So the first one is what was mentioned was the dimensions of thriving, domains of thriving, which is an observation scale. So we developed this together with Outward Bound and went into all the kind of programs that Outward Bound has to offer to look at these 4 domains that come out of what we call the Clover model, namely the physical side of things, courage, reflection, and belonging. That was one of the methods because a lot of the work in SEL is self-report and attitudinal, and we wanted to really get a sense of what actually happens in the programs. And we were very impressed with the fact that the programs across the board are very strong. The Outward Bound programs are very strong, and they really relate, these dimensions relate to the foundation of what Outward Bound believes in. Now, the next slide is pre-post, where we wanted to actually define very clearly what are the domains or the dimensions of how young people see change overall. So this is a network of 10 schools, 4,688 students, as you can see. And this is the average responses from start to the end of their engagement with Outward Bound. And when you look at this, the light blue is the start of the program, the reflection on what was I like when I started with Outward Bound. And the dark blue is how did I feel I am at the end of this course. And you can see that across the board, with all these students, I mean, this is not a small sample, across 10 schools of Outward Bound, the results are all positive on SEL, and not only positive, but statistically positive. So the young people are telling us that they have grown throughout, and these are all the dimensions: empathy, group relationships, learning interests, perseverance, really important, responsibility, self-awareness. So that actually in itself was very surprising with how strong the kind of support is that young people feel in getting kind of towards those skills that we're talking about. And the last thing I want to just show you is actually 3,656 students who were on courses of this 2022, the year 2022, that were on courses 3 days or longer. And this was around across 9 regional Outward Bound schools. So these are almost all of the Outward Bound schools. And these are the percentages of students that reported improvements in each of the areas in those courses. And you can again see that in almost all of the dimensions, kind of assertiveness, perseverance, let's take perseverance as an example, 65% of the students said, I have grown in this area, perseverance, after my 3-day, 5-day, 7-day, whatever it was, program. So again, that's very impressive, I find, because the others who didn't say they grew didn't say that they declined. They didn't say, oh, I'm much worse. They just said, okay, on this kind of particular area, like it was a good program, but 38% say, well, I grew, but that means the majority said they didn't grow. So maybe Outward Bound doesn't do a lot of work on emotion control, but does a lot of work on other things. And I'm actually glad that some are higher than some others that are lower, because otherwise I would just think people are filling it out to kind of be socially conform and say, oh, everything is fine. No, there is some kind of change, and that's where, but the results overall in terms of SEL, of what Outward Bound does, are very, very impressive. I hope I answered the question. I know that there's much more to say. I'm going to stop sharing. Okay.
Yeah, we know that we could talk about this for hours and days, of course. Katie, I wanted to ask you, looking at some of the data that Gil has shared, are there other pieces of the data collection or trends that you're seeing with what we're doing at the lab that you're excited by, eager to kind of dive deeper into as far as new data points or looking for current trends? Like, what are you excited by?
We've built a really robust system with PEAR over the past several years. And what that's done is now gotten us to the point where we can start to fine tune more. So as you saw in that, we had kind of from 40-something% to 60-something% of students reporting change on all of these different scales. And when we actually look at any change, we see like 94% of students are changing on something. 78% are changing on 4 or more. So then we can start to think about what is it? Are certain programs leading more change in one area than another? Are there certain approaches that our schools are taking that are leading to that? So can we start to fine tune, by age maybe, and say at this point in middle school, kids really need this. In the emerging adult age group, they really need that. And start to focus in our kind of interventions a bit more, and then be able to see, can we see that in the outcomes then? The other thing that has been really interesting about our data, because we do collect demographics along with the data, and we, whenever we do statistical analysis, we look at different race and ethnicity groups. We also look at different gender groups to see, are there differences between those groups and the outcomes that they're experiencing. Generally, we're seeing very consistent outcomes across those different groups, which I consider positive, right? We're seeing, okay, we're working with a lot of students with different racial identities, different gender identities, and there's consistency. We're not seeing a trend of, a certain group of students is always having stronger outcomes than another group. What we don't see, though, in this data is texture on the experience that the student had. So we're seeing the growth that they're reporting. We're not seeing how safe did they feel, how respected did they feel, would they recommend the program to someone else. So we are starting to work with a group, or we've been working for the past year with a group called Listen for Good, that's helping us to also explore student feedback on their experience, on how they're experiencing the program, their interactions with staff, how the environment is supportive to them, so that we can pair that data together. We don't want to make assumptions just because we're seeing that learning growth that everyone's having a positive experience also. So we're really starting to think about how do we merge that together, so we're getting a more holistic picture of the experience that students are having, in particular with that focus on equity and wanting to really understand the experience of students of different identities on their courses.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting, just to get again a holistic view of like what are all of the components here, and like how does Outward Bound impact students on course and after, and what do they bring with them after they attend a course or do a program with us. And so I'm curious, Gianeen and Annie, if you can share some of those insights, like working with students, what SEL type opportunities are your schools providing? I know, Gianeen, you had mentioned some partnerships and things like that. Would love to hear a little bit more from each of you about how you see SEL showing up or benefiting your students or school community. What changes are you seeing? Things like that.
Yes, and like you said, throughout the entire school, beginning in pre-K all the way up, I think the teachers in the lower grades are more focused on, many lessons throughout the day. Using curriculum that we have along with our class dojo. They have like little videos that our children love and interact with. And as we are getting up to the older grades in middle school, that's where I reach out to the various programs. And I would say Outward Bound really sparked my staff members, like bringing them to Outward Bound. I believe that if I get my staff on board and they're thinking on board to, push and persevere and push towards something they don't want to do, in the beginning of me saying, let's go, they didn't want to go, but after, they loved it. So just knowing that my staff felt it and then was able to articulate the difference in how they were able to start the school year. They're continuously asking me, can we go back? And because, we have other things to focus on. I haven't brought them back every year like I want to, but the point is my teachers got the idea. I'm going to stop saying teachers. My entire staff got the idea that they need to do the work first before they can teach it to our students. And so I partner with other programs like Centers of Supportive Schools, where our sixth, seventh, and eighth graders are beginning to do like peer connections, and they're being the mentor for students. And so those connections are being built. And we also have some psychologists come in and talk to our staff members around, the trauma and what they need to do, and lots of different activities. And of course, the school district supporting us with the equity work. And so we're able to have these conversations in our school now to address the educational gap, the trusting relationships around, we have mostly African American students and mostly Caucasian teachers, and so we're looking at how we can bridge that gap, and so that the children can feel like heard and seen and being able to be respected. And so a lot of the work here is we're sitting in circles, we're talking about the work, we are crying, we are hugging, and we are getting down to the nitty-gritty. And the biggest factor, of course, is our parents getting on board. And we've been sharing and understanding that getting our parents on board with the same kind of thought process has, I think, been our hardest struggle. But with the help of, I would say, Outward Bound, and when our kids first went on there's an expedition for the 5 days, like, they were not trying to hear it. And so now we have another opportunity to go. We have more and more kids who want to get on board because they saw the significant difference in our students, from how they're feeling about themselves, from their want to just jump on board, to lead something. They're not afraid, it's taking education to another level. So now we're in math class, like you talked about, and we're not saying, can you just tell me the answer, because I don't get it. They're actually trying and figuring things out and asking for help from their peers. And so if you're there to see the transformation, I tell you, Blaine is completely transformed because of strategically placing the partners and to support. I can't do this work by myself, so I thank you. And we're having a great time doing it, and I can't wait to continue this work.
That's so exciting. I'm really excited to hear that. I also, for what it's worth, I'm based in Philly, so I'm excited to hear that there are programs and schools in Philly that are benefiting from these sorts of things. So that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Annie, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, it sounds like a school I would love to visit. It sounds like the kids are very engaged, so kudos for that. I realize, what the core is any experience that is encouraging students to take a risk. So in student-centered classrooms, that sort of experiential pedagogy that requires students to show up, but it also happens on college campuses through these authentic learning opportunities, internships, community-based research, community-engaged learning. Those things can happen within a classroom. And I see some need for growth on the part of faculty to lean into this, to allow students to have a voice in the college classroom. That can be a hard thing to hand over to students. And I find that particularly in higher ed, that we're really steeped in this very traditional education. Not particularly at my institution at Warren Wilson, but there is still a feeling that risk-taking has to happen somewhere outside the classroom walls. But I think it can still be done very authentically within the classroom. Post-pandemic, I saw a lot of students leaning back, feeling like maybe they had missed a couple years of those opportunities to take some risks. So I'm finding that I'm more intentionally explaining to students there's a reason to take these risks. It's to the benefit of you to step in, to lean in. And I'm finding I'm needing to more intentionally name the outcomes that are possible once you do lean in and take that risk, and the opportunities for them, not just in that moment, but beyond the classroom, that those risks will have benefits.
Yeah. Katie, I see you nodding along over there. Did you want to add anything to that?
Just the piece about kind of bringing that experiential approach into the college classroom, and that need to kind of break out of that traditional professor imparting knowledge on the student. Just reminds me, one of the practices that we've identified is mutual engagement and learning. And we've really recognized that one of the most powerful things for our students on an Outward Bound course is that learning doesn't just go one way. Staff are open to learning from students as well, and students are learning from each other. And I think when you can create that environment where the learning's multi-directional and there's an acknowledgement that we are all bringing something. The teacher may be bringing a certain content in Outward Bound, the instructor knows how to navigate. They know the technical skills, right? They know some of that students need. But the students themselves often have the best ideas about how to get from point A to point B, how to work together, how to solve a problem. And so creating that environment has been really powerful for us, and I think is something that could extend into the more traditional classroom as well.
I'm curious, going off of this idea of like collaborating and sharing knowledge between students and staff members, educators. This is a question for everyone. For you and in your line of work and all that you're seeing at your schools or other institutions, what is the ideal relationship between researchers, educators, or other supporters in advancing this line of work? Who are the people that need to be involved? Gil, I'll let you, I see you're off mute, so I'll let you go first.
Okay. I actually, one of the things I'm listening to all of you that goes through my mind, which is not an immediate response to your question, but is really important. What is really Outward Bound's main contribution, right? Because all the things we're talking about are true for any educational setting that wants to be successful these days. Kids are distracted. You got to make them your partners. They have to be empowered. They have to actually have the sense of flow, a sense of like purpose. Why am I doing this? They have to have the courage to fail. So that's really true of a whole kind of educational revolution that has occurred, that is in some ways progressive, but it also gets back to some of the roots of constructivist education. So why Outward Bound? Or another way of saying it, how can Outward Bound in its strategic plan say, well, we're not just one more organization that does what everyone should be doing, but we're doing something that's very specific. I don't want to answer this right now because I think we should do that collectively and in our work with Outward Bound. But I think there is a very special way in which young people not only engage with the world through hands-on activities in classrooms, but where they go out in a situation where they have to have courage. It's pretty scary to be out in nature at night, really dealing with all the kind of lack of comfort that you're used to and being pushed beyond what you think you can do in a context where you have to navigate peer relations in ways that are just more powerful, more existential almost than the typical program or the typical school classroom. So I think we have to really figure out what those distinctive features are. And I think I'm really proud of Outward Bound to have made this transition. And Arthur Pearson, who many of you know, was actually part of the founder of this learning lab, to actually say, we got to partner with schools, not only partnering with schools within Outward Bound, but we got to partner with schools, especially urban schools, and make it a kind of almost human right for young people to spend time in nature, to not only have an experience of nature or an experience of courage, but an experience of socio-emotional growth or youth development growth outside the traditional bounds, not only of classrooms, but also cities. So I want to leave that. And so just the final return to your question, that is the partnership we're talking about, the partnership of traditional educational settings, of teachers being engaged and at the table, research institutions like my own, not just sitting there and thinking about research, but really being totally in partnership like Katie and we are, and Katie and her team, which just means breaking bread. It means getting to know each other. It means trusting each other. It means pushing each other. And it means really defining constructs and measures together. And everyone wants that. NSF wants that. The federal government wants research like that. We've done it. We're in the process of doing it. So we really have a leadership role to play, to not just do this as lip service, which is very easy. Have a couple of people, at the table who are practitioners and they can kind of speak up, but no, to really do this in a kind of synthetic and integrated way. And I'm really proud to be part of that. And maybe we can write about this one day and kind of describe our experience, which is now 6 years old.
Absolutely. Gianeen and Annie, what are your thoughts on all of those moving parts and all those stakeholders and how we all need to be connected?
So,
Go ahead, Gianeen.
No, go ahead. You go first.
Okay, I guess I'm going to pose a question too, is wondering what we stand to lose if we don't advance this work forward, because I'm deeply committed to the students, and it seems like everyone on this call is as well. But I see some greater implications for community, for a democratic society, if we do not have, if our citizens do not have these skills. So I think that's my question too, is how can we broaden this work in a way that engages not just educators who I love, and not just students, but our society stands to gain quite a lot with an emphasis on social emotional learning and what Outward Bound provides. So I don't have an answer to that other than let's not limit who is engaged with this question. And I always want to ask students, I want to make sure that they're our partners as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll hand it to Gianeen.
So I would say, and actually forgive me, I forgot the question, but I'll go off of, what was the question again?
Just around partnership and just the stakeholders and voices that need to be part of these conversations and advancing SEL work at large.
Yes, I would say that you always think of the students, right? And I'm a pre-K to 8 school where I think that's the foundation of the work, and I think our when we see change in our students, then you'll get the buy-in from our parents. And that's what I've been seeing, right? It's really difficult for me to change the mentality of my parents on a one-to-one or when we have workshops. But when they see their children like thriving and like, wow, what happened? It's where the power is. So when I'm looking at the opportunity, I didn't do this partnership by myself. Thank God I had a superintendent, Amelia Coleman Brown, who put this partnership together. And I was thankful to be a part of this. And I don't know if, other principals are, taking on this opportunity like I am. But, once I've, sit at a table and understand, what it could do, like I'm all hands on deck. But I think the collaboration is important because you can put all the pieces together for your children. And so I love the idea that sitting at a table and figuring out how this can be done. And I love the fact that this is like the right of all our students at Blaine being able to have this opportunity because they don't see grass and be out in nature. They're we have a schoolyard. Our schoolyard is all pavement, and they don't get the opportunity of playing in grass and soccer and all those different things that their suburban children are able to see. So I definitely think that's the foundation of the work, to just continuously doing this work from the youngest ones and on up.
Katie, what, I guess too, from your perspective and all the work that you're doing with Outward Bound, with PEAR and with our educational partners, like what are your thoughts on how this continues to grow too?
I would say we are just have deep gratitude for all of our educational partners. 90% of our students at Outward Bound in the US come through educational partners, schools, community-based organizations. So we wouldn't have jobs without those relationships. And what I think Gianeen spoke to that progression of a first year going and the students being a bit tepid, and then the culture starts to build, and we see that kind of anecdotally over and over again. So if a partner comes Outward Bound, we can't do it on our own. So much of the experience happens the moment the school introduces the idea to the students, with the culture that's built around it. And then what happens when they go back as well. And we're actually really excited to bring some of our focus over the next couple of years to that interaction, and what are the pieces before the students come and after the students come that really helps to set them up for the best learning. So we're excited to continue working more deeply with some of our school partners on that as well.
We have some great questions. We want to jump into a few toward the end of this, but just to ask a quick ending question, just to go around. What is, and this is going to be a loaded question, so I'm sorry to end with it. What is your favorite or most rewarding aspect of what you're doing in education and SEL and working with students? What's the most inspiring thing that you're working on?
So I'll start, and just because I think about this all the time, and it's like, it's a student, right? When in Philadelphia, there's a lot of children who it's transient, where they're coming in and out of schools, and a student coming in at 6th grade and all over the place, having all these different concerns, not focused on school, and then being able to see a significant change within 1 year, where a student is raising their hand, asking questions, looking, into high schools of their choice. It's just being able to see there is the child actually being themselves, not necessarily having to worry about their environment and how to act in their environment. They are becoming who they are supposed to be. And that's what makes it great.
Well, I'm happy to jump in. I am most excited about the fact that, difficult situations, difficult lives, trauma, things you don't want people to have to experience, that we embrace that, rather than saying, oh, all these difficult things lead to psychopathology, to a lifelong kind of ACEs, adverse child experiences will lead to divorce and alcoholism and all that stuff, which statistically there's some truth to it. But what's left out of that narrative is that actually the majority of people who experience difficulties in childhood and youth, with the right support, can be psychotherapy. As a clinical psychologist, I do a lot of that, and I'm so inspired how people can actually make out of their sorrows some real amazing kind of creativity and amazing ways in which they can move forward, not just individually, but collectively. And we need a lot of that right now. We live in a kind of pretty crisis oriented world, and we just haven't even fully started our election. So for the next, 9 months or 8 months, it will be pretty hard for all of us. So I think to kind of keep the hope going, and really see how young people, how inventive they are in adapting and dealing with some of the difficulties, and how what we call developmental resiliency, how they develop out of that adversity also some really significant forward motion and growth. I mean, that is awe-inspiring.
I'll jump in. I feel that a growing convergence of experiential ed and maybe more than a convergence, to the forefront of addressing what we're seeing with young people saying they don't have meaning and purpose in their lives, and the increase in mental health challenges that experiential ed has a direct response and an ability to help young people find purpose, which is a cornerstone of well-being. So I'm really excited about this conversation and to continue helping understand how experiential ed offers that opportunity for young people to thrive and flourish.
I guess I'll just wrap up by kind of bringing it back to the personal again. I'm a parent. I have a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old. I've been in this field for over 20 years. I can call myself an expert. I cannot do it alone. I need their teachers to help. I need their little league coaches to help, right? Like I need all of the adults in their lives to be supporting them on this trajectory as well. And so I'm just really excited about how we can get this knowledge to more educators, to more folks, coaches, youth development programs. Like, how do we help everyone to best support all of our kids? Because none of us can do it alone.
That's true. I guess just to jump into, we've had some really great questions come in throughout our conversation, but we're going to pick just a few to answer as we wrap up here. I want to address one of the questions that came from Rosa. She was referencing the comment that Gianeen had made around the school community and having that relationship between staff being excited and wanting to like take part in these sorts of opportunities, and how that kind of feeds to students as well. And that helps to make the learnings stick. And so Rosa says, I'm wondering about the long-term results for students that go on their own without the support system. So Gianeen, are there any thoughts there that you could share on some of the longer-term impact of those relationships and the impact that you're seeing at your school?
So I would say that we have just been implementing this work over the last 3 years. So I don't know what the results are long term. I do know we do have children who come back after they are in high school and stop by and say hello, but I don't know how they're performing since then. So we have to get that data.
And we had another question from Jimmy asking, could one of the panelists share a specific representative example of applying SEL skills and techniques, and maybe one that's also unsuccessful for comparison?
I'd love to hear from Annie on that, because I feel like as young people head off to college, that's a great time for those skills to kick in or not.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if the question was relevant necessarily. I mean, I'll use my example and hopefully it'll be relevant for you. So in a class that I teach in educational psychology, preparing future educators, it's sort of a meta experience. So they learn about we particularly use CASTLE, the wheel, social emotional learning skills. So the students themselves learn about them, but then they have to create a lesson that's developmentally appropriate for young people, that doesn't just tell you what those skills are. They actually have to use them in the lesson. So if it's relationship skills, for example, then they have to design a lesson that will require them to consider some sort of challenge and work together to solve it, so that they're having that experience of experiencing the assets or the aspects of the castle wheel. But the meta experience for my college students is they're also examining that for themselves. So they're in a small group thinking about those particular skills, and then they have to do a self-evaluation of their group experience. Let's say this lasts for 3 class periods for me. They have to take a look at and self-evaluate how they did on the castle wheel themselves, as they're also designing an experience for younger students. So that's one example. To your question of like what doesn't work, I think anything that doesn't require you to authentically engage with those skills and assets, just telling students about character attributes, generally doesn't change behavior, but experiencing it, which is why I think experiential ed and Outward Bound works, is you have to be in it and you find out and you get feedback, and you probably don't necessarily do great with all of them initially, but you have those opportunities to self-correct. So anytime that we are merely telling students about SEL, I think those will generally not work.
I can just jump in with a very personal note. I love the question, and I always feel like it's much easier to be abstract than be very direct, concrete. But I was working with a student who was part of a middle school after-school program, and he was preoccupied with being accepted by the cool kids. And he was so much suffering that he was only kind of eating together with the kind of not so cool kids, and was always looking over to the table where the cool kids were. And that was kind of defining his life. And I tried everything I could to convince him that, you know, there might be some other ways of looking at the world besides who's cool and who's not cool. And that he certainly made himself less cool by wanting to be so much kind of a cool kid. And I think what was the success, there was a half a success story and half a not so success story. The success story was that he began to really get engaged in sports, and in this had a great coach. And through that and the skills that he learned, he noticed that actually being cool has something to do with skills, not just an inherent thing you have or you don't have. And was really powerful. And the not so wonderful thing is that he was, at least in middle school, not quite able to recognize that he was undermining himself, that his self-awareness was not developed enough that he could see that he actually was putting himself down all the time by thinking that other kids are so much cooler. But I think I haven't been in touch with him. I think that over time that would probably evolve. It's definitely a middle school thing to really be in or out and feeling very much out. But I think it was not so much the therapy as it was the activity and the after-school world that made the difference.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing all of that. If you have other questions, feel free to put those into our chat. We will send along your comments and feedback and questions to our panelists here to see if there are some other answers we can get over to you. But wanted to kind of wrap up this conversation and thank you all for joining us this afternoon, Gianeen, Annie, Gil, and Katie, for sharing your expertise this afternoon. And thank you to everyone who's joined us in the audience here. I know that we're running a little bit over time, but appreciate your patience and tuning in and sticking with us. So thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you all for tuning in.